Welcome back to the Reidel Law Firm Library and Odyssey channel. Wanted to update everyone on the Russian sanctions situation. My video I put out 4 days ago is now out of date, and I'm wrong. So I need to correct that for folks who've been watching and have had some inquiries about some of the updates. And it's like this stuff's moving so fast that you may watch one of my videos or read an article a couple days ago. You really need to do your due diligence every single day if you're dealing with transactions in Russia or business in Russia, because it is changing every single day. So I wanted to update. I was wrong in my last video. I think I published Friday, Saturday, in regards to activating the SWIFT sanction. United States and the European Union did, in fact, over the weekend, decide to remove I think 10 banks from the SWIFT network. Really completely unheard of, except for countries that have comprehensive sanctions. Countries like North Korea, Iran. I don't even think Venezuela has been removed from SWIFT. So it is an exceptionally harsh sanctions remedy. And actually, I'm looking at the regulation right now. It's 7 Russian banks have been removed. Now, interestingly, Sberbank is not one of those banks that has been removed from SWIFT. And from what I understand, primarily that's because most energy transactions and nation-to-nation payments for oil and gas to Russia go through Sberbank. So go figure, right? That's an interesting exclusion there. So that's one of the areas I'm wrong. Now, I guess I'm 70% wrong, maybe 80%, in that U.S. and the European Union have removed 7 banks, which are quite large and have quite a number of subsidiaries under them. 7 Russian banks from the SWIFT network. So it's not all banks, but the practical terms and the practical effect for a lot of Russian citizens and those of us who do business in Russia is that funds will no longer cross borders between Russia and the European Union and the United States for the time being, unfortunately. So that is a major update. The next level really for sanctioning banks and removing them from the SWIFT network is to add all Russian banks to that, which would really be an extremely detrimental situation for business owners, for the Russian people, and for people transacting across borders, across the U.S. and or European Union and Russian borders. So let's see what else. The other major development in sanctions is that the Central Bank of Russia, the National Wealth Fund, and the Ministry of Finance have also been added to the sanctions list, and no transactions are permitted between U.S. and EU persons and those entities. Now, again, there is another caveat and carve out from that. In legal terms, a general license is what it's referred to in the regulations. There's now a general license for any energy transactions that go through the Central Bank of Russia in particular. I don't think it covers it may cover the Ministry of Finance or the Wealth Fund. I'm not positive, but I know for a fact it covers the Central Bank of Russia. And that license is open and effective until June. It may be renewed at that point, or the sanction will be dropped or something. But what this means is that anyone in the European Union or the United States will be permitted to transact for energy, right? They can buy oil and gas and commit other energy transactions with those in Russia under this general license without fear of being sanctioned or going through a bunch of hoops to try and get a specific license for that transaction. Again, very interesting carve out. Obviously, that is one of the major commodities and exports of Russia to the European Union. So the European Union doesn't want to hurt themselves too harshly at this point. They don't want to just cut off, I think, like 20 to 30 or 40% of their fuel and energy right now. So they've left that carve out, and so it's business as usual in a sense for energy transactions between Russia and the European Union. Now there's other developments that are kind of outside the scope of what I like to cover. in regards to Russian oil. So I won't talk about that, but there's some good resources online that you can check out to dig a little deeper into that. So that's a major development. The final major development of the weekend was that Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov, I forget his first name, are now added as individuals to the sanctions list. So now any assets or financial transactions with Putin and Lavrov with European Union and the United States are blocked. The assets will be seized or frozen. So really crazy developments there. It's very rarely that you see a national leader like that of their stature sanctioned. Only in like the most corrupt and the most belligerent nations like North Korea, like Iran, like Venezuela to some extent, face those types of severe sanctions. And then other leaders who are corrupt. Like there's several in Africa who have been sanctioned and monitored just because they basically are just so corrupt they're stealing from their nation. So huge development there as well, and I don't expect that will affect any of my clients or anyone watching, but it's kind of a harbinger of where the sanctions are going and how these are escalating very quickly. And let's see. So we talked about the SWIFT sanctions. Okay. So let's talk about the practical terms. So we've been dealing with clients, colleagues, and media inquiries about how this is affecting folks. What we're hearing on the ground is at this point, in practical terms, currency and monetary transactions between the West, the European Union, the United States, and Russia are essentially frozen. Banks and wire companies, money transfer companies, and even Apple Pay and Google Pay or whatever, they are no longer transacting in Russia. Now, this is not the result of a sanction specifically for those services and those types of businesses. What it is a function of U.S. sanctions regulations in that they are strict liability. So even if you accidentally violate a sanction, if you forget to check, your sanctions list or whatever, you just check off a box on accident and let the transaction go through, and you accidentally violate U.S. sanctions, you are liable 100%. And making a mistake or not having the intent to avoid sanctions or evade sanctions is not a defense. You are guilty because you did it, period. No matter the intent, which is very unusual in U.S. Jurisprudence because we have an intent-based type of criminal system. So what this means for businesses and service companies that transact with Russia or transact across borders is that the risk of allowing any transactions to move forward, even if they are legal and not sanctioned, the risk of them potentially triggering a sanction because they didn't do their due diligence and they allowed a payment to go to Lavrov or Putin or something like that. The risk of that is far greater than the benefit they will receive from allowing those transactions to move forward. For example, U.S. sanctions penalties are multiples of whatever amount you allowed to go through. If you let $100 go through, you can expect to pay thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars in fines and penalties to the U.S. government for allowing that transaction to move forward. So the risk is just, it's disproportionate. And companies are going to take the calculated move to not transact with Russia in this time because the risk is too great. And it's unfortunate because that's going to affect everyday people. It's going to affect business owners. It's already affecting Russian civilians and Ukrainian civilians at that, who no longer can access their payments, whether that's through the Visa or the MasterCard network or through Google Pay or Apple Pay, or receiving remittances from overseas. There's quite a lot of instances, of my own friends, family, and colleagues who have attempted to send remittances, send some money to those either in Russia or in Ukraine just to help them out and make sure they get to safety, regardless of what side they're on the conflict. getting people to safety is very important, and that's what we've tried to do and help others try to do. And those transactions are blocked, just 100%. It's not because anyone in the transaction is sanctioned, but it's because the businesses are not willing to take that risk. Or on the other hand, what may also be causing is that, so say Western Union, the bank accounts that they hold between the United States and Russia may be with a sanctioned bank, and that's something that we don't know. But behind the scenes at these money service businesses and whatnot, they may not have access to their funds any longer in Russia because they bank with sanctioned banks. So it's exceptionally difficult time right now for folks on either side of the conflict and just civilians in general in that part of the world. It's not going to get any easier, unfortunately, right now. It is just, it's chaos, really, in regards to making sure people are getting to where they need to be safely, getting them the essentials, whether that's currency or food and water. It's really a chaotic situation. It's unfortunate. So sanctions are not helping that. That's a major downside to the sanctions being imposed and the position that companies are taking on the sanctions in making the risk-based analysis whether they should continue any transactions with Russia or not. Now, some companies have coached it or explained some of their actions in regards to kind of political positions on either side of the conflict. And I'm not sure that that's totally legitimate, to be honest with you. From my perspective, it is mostly a function of risk analysis and not so much a political position. Maybe it is a political position, I don't know, but really the insights behind that and probably the factor that will make that decision a reality in practical terms is that the risk is just too great. The risk is too high to be able to take on potential penalties, right, and potential violations. So on the other side of the conflict, Russia has also imposed some counter, I don't want to call them sanctions because it's not exactly what they are, but counter restrictions or counter regulations at this point. And those are affecting U.S. businesses and even some of my clients and colleagues. It's kind of crazy that both sides are just throwing up barriers to trade and making it harder for civilians and everyday people to make a living and transact and take care of themselves, really. So on the Russian side, what they have done is they have blocked the sale of equities blocking the sale of entities by foreigners, by foreign persons. I think in particular it's EU and U.S. persons. I don't believe that affects like other nationalities outside of those EU and U.S. jurisdiction. Probably in Latin America or Asia, you're able to still deal in those equities. Now the value is dropping because there's more barriers and they're not as liquid any longer. And in fact, the Moscow exchange has been closed, I think, for a week now, something like that. So the transferability, the liquidity of those assets are close to zero right now, unfortunately. So Russia has blocked foreigners from selling, and they have also blocked any payments to U.S. and EU persons. And what is defined as payments is things like debt payments, bond payments, things like that. And their intent supposedly is not to create default situations, but in essence, that's what they have done. For instance, if you're a Russian business and you have to make a mortgage payment to a bank in the United States for your business, you're no longer able to do that, and you're now in default, right? And potentially you are at risk of having your assets either seized or the collateral taken that is located outside of Russia. So that's a major concern right now for Russian businesses. Another major impact is that most international transactions these days, cross-border transactions, are financed to some extent, whether that's through a letter of credit or it's financed through a bank on either side for getting the goods to and fro and whatnot. Most of the time it's not a cash transaction. It goes through banks, it goes through with a letter of credit or some form of a loan and whatnot. So Now, any Russian imports that want to pay for goods and services to that extent for importing products and services into Russia cannot do that. They and even the banks at this point, it looks like they're not permitted to make payments on these imports and on these transactions to anyone in the U.S. and the EU, or any persons located under the jurisdiction of the European Union and the United States. So again, that is it's an exceptional barrier to trade. It's going, basically, it's going, even if the other restrictions weren't in place or whatever, or were dropped later, this single-handedly would create a huge fall in the trade numbers and the amount of transactions that are even possible. So business between the U.S. and Russia and the European Union is very, very difficult right now. It is it's just an exceptionally difficult time, and really what we need to know as a business person who's maybe transacting in either the U.S., European Union, or Russia is that you've got to slow down. You've got to stop. You have to understand what the sanctions are, how they affect you and your business and your transactions, and get an idea of how to comply with those sanctions, comply with those restrictions, so that you will not be in violation and face any strict penalties and whatnot. It's just the way it has to be right now at this point. In the future, it looks like Russia will probably be restructuring supply chains and imports and exports away from Europe and away from the United States and North America. Probably they will be looking towards increasing trade with Asia, with East Asia, and Latin America, which many countries in Latin America and East Asia have decided not to sanction or remain neutral in the economic warfare kind of side. So that's probably what will happen in the near future. It's going to take several months, or if not years, to be able to do that comprehensively and to do it to the extent to replace the trade that we're losing now. But that is likely what the next steps are for Russian businesses and those transacting with business with Russia. So I'm going to do a follow-up video probably in the next couple of days, just to kind of queuing people up what they should be doing in the situation when you may be facing potential sanctions on your transactions or sanctions compliance. So stay tuned for that. Again, if you have questions, concerns, or you are doing business across borders and you have questions about how this may affect you, or you need assistance in structuring transactions correctly and complying with these laws, reach out to Reidel Law Firm. I will put some the contact info in the description. Also, our law firm, myself, we've been quoted in Kommersant media in Russia, and Vodimisty, I think, something like that. I'll put those links there. It's in Russian, but in case anyone's interested in getting our take for the impact on the Russian civilians and the Russian economy, I will include those as well. So stay safe, everyone out there, and reach out if we can be of assistance, and have a great day.